Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to Kaplan's PSAT Prep Live. My name is Boris. I'll be your teacher on camera for the first couple of hours today, and I'd like to welcome you because this is the very first session to the program. I hope that you get a lot out of it and that you get the score that you have been dreaming of on the PSAT. Now, let me know in the chat, folks, how is life treating you this afternoon? How are you doing on this lovely Saturday as we get rolling with PSAT Prep Live? My goodness, there's a lot of folks here. So Jake, hello. Casey, hello. One of the first questions, of course, people always ask is this a robot or is it really live? Yeah, I am either a human being or the most advanced AI of all time. Hi, Ben. Hi, Yaren. Good to see you guys. Amanda says, cool cat. Are y'all ready for some learning? I love that attitude. I definitely am ready for some teaching. So if you're ready for some learning, we'll make a good team. Now, I wanted to let you guys know that this is not a one-person show, so although I am on the camera, I am supported by an incredible team of people behind the scenes. We got Greg, who is our technical wizard, making sure that everything happens and nothing explodes too much. Then also behind the scenes, we've got Beth, Stephanie, David, Farah, Joe, Julie, Katie, all making sure that you have a great experience today. Now, just so you know, because there's quite a few of you here, the chat is moderated, meaning that when you type something, we see it, but you don't necessarily see it right away. So please note that, of course, if you say something, offensive or really ridiculous, we're not going to let it through. The point of this is also, that if, I ask for an answer to a question and, 500 people say D, maybe we'll show, 50 of them and not the other 450 just to keep the chat, somewhat usable. So if you don't see what you've typed, please, please, please don't get frustrated. It did go through. We did see it. If you have questions, we will address them privately. So we hear you, even if you don't always see what you've typed. I just want to make sure you guys know that as we get started with this session. So this first session is going to be about math, but we're going to begin every session with a quick overview of the PSAT just because people come in and out. Some people will pick the middle of PSAT Prep Live as their first session. So no matter where you come in, we're going to make sure we got you covered and that you understand the PSAT structure. So we have 4 tests on the PSAT. It always goes in this order: reading, then writing, then 2 sections of math. All told, you're going to answer 139 questions in a little under 3 hours, or close to 3 hours if you include the break. Now, because today's lesson, this first lesson, is math, I'm going to focus on the math sections. You're going to have a calculator section, which is 45 minutes long and has 31 questions that can be done with a calculator. You're also going to have a non-calculator section, which is a little bit shorter, both in time and the number of questions. Both of these sections will have mostly multiple choice questions, but there will be 4 grid-ins at the end. Now, one of the questions we get a lot is, can I use a calculator? And the answer is yes. So in class, always feel free to use a calculator. We will tell you if there's a question that specifically we know would be on the non-calculator section. So always, if you think it would be helpful, feel free to use a calculator in this Prep Live program. Now, let's talk a little bit about the scoring of the PSAT and what I know interests many of you a great deal: scholarships. So there's no wrong answer penalty, meaning that if you guessed wrong, it's exactly the same thing as leaving a question blank. What this means is that if you run out of time, it is worth it to just bubble in some random letter for every single question you don't get to answer. Personally, I prefer the greatest PSAT answer choice of all time, which is, of course, choice B for Boris, but I don't want to pressure anybody into using that one. You can use whichever choice is best for you. Now, when you get your score, it will be in 2 parts. There will be a score from 160 to 760 on the math, and then a score from 160 to 760 in the verbal portions, the writing and reading put together. These will be added together to give you a final score of 320 to 1520. So what does this score mean? Well, let me know in the chat, folks. Who are my juniors? Who are the people in 11th grade and you're about to take the PSAT next month for reals? Clements gives a vote for choice C. Maybe that's choice C for Clements. My thinking cap is on. So here we have quite a few of you guys who are juniors, although I have seen that there's plenty of you who are freshmen or sophomores. So let me break it down. When you take the PSAT your freshman year or your sophomore year, it doesn't do anything. If you do terrible on it, nothing bad happens. If you do great on it, nothing good happens. It really doesn't matter your freshman or sophomore year what score you get on the PSAT, good or bad. So I'm not saying don't prep. I'm not saying like, see ya, like I'm not saying you need to leave, but do know that the prep that you're doing will not give you a tangible benefit on the PSAT itself. The tangible benefit is that it might prepare you to take the SAT sooner. So then you take the SAT, say your sophomore year, get an amazing score, and you file it away. Now you're a senior, you can focus on your college applications, doing college research and college visits without having to worry about prepping also for the SAT at the same time. And you can laugh at all your friends who are trying to throw that into the mix while also doing college apps and juggling 11 AP classes. So if you do prep now and take the SAT out of the way early, you're going to feel like a genius when you're a junior and a senior. So I'm not saying don't prep, but I want to set your expectations accordingly that there's nothing that you stand to gain or lose explicitly from the PSAT. Now, if you are a junior, then you have the opportunity to win some sweet, sweet national merit scholarships. And the way that this works is that a certain percentage of people in each state get to become national merit finalists. And this helps you directly and indirectly. Directly, you get a little bit of scholarship money from the National Merit Scholarship Program, and you can check out the website on the screen here, nationalmerit.org, for more information about that. The bigger deal, though, is the indirect benefit. So, for example, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. A shout out to all my fellow Ohioans here. And in Columbus, Ohio is Ohio State University. That was in my hometown. Now, because I was a National Merit finalist as a result of my junior year PSAT score, I was offered a full ride, and I could have attended the honors program at Ohio State University completely and utterly tuition-free if I'd wanted to. That's kind of huge. So there is a lot at stake if you get to become a National Merit finalist because you get a really sweet reward. However, if you don't do well on the PSAT, it doesn't hurt you because colleges don't actually look at your score. They're not going to be like, oh, this loser only got a 1,000 on the PSAT. Guess we're not taking him. No, it doesn't make any difference. So the PSAT is kind of a nice thing because it gives you something to aspire to. There's a really great reward at the end if you can become a National Merit finalist. But at the same time, if you don't do well, then, nothing bad happens whatsoever. It's only the SAT and the ACT that actually get counted by colleges for the purpose of deciding whether to admit you or not. Well, I'm not going to go into all this detail in every session that we have, but since this is the very, very first lesson of PSAT Prep Live, I did want to take a moment to explain this to you guys because you want to make sure that your expectations are set accordingly. This is not a test that's worth stressing out about. Nothing bad will happen if you don't do well. It's totally okay. But hey, if you think you've got a shot at becoming a National Merit finalist, go for it, because if you do, you can win some absolutely sick scholarship cash. Okay, that is a quick look at the PSAT, the scoring, and the purpose. Now let's get into the learning objectives for this first hour of PSAT Prep Live. So here we're going to do math. We're going to introduce the Kaplan method for math, and then we're going to focus on linear equations. So there's going to be a potpourri of linear equation content that we review in this hour. One, of course, is just simply solving linear equations, but also we're going to review systems of equations, linear equations when they're graphed, and then also how to translate word problems into equations, which you can then solve. So everything today is themed around the art and the science of solving linear equations. So a few folks have been asking how long is the session, and the answer is it is an hour, and then we have another hour-long session afterwards. So 2 hours today, or just one if you only stick around for the first one. All right, folks, that is it for our introduction. Now let's take a look at the Kaplan method for math. I know what a lot of people think when they see this phrase, the Kaplan method for math. You think, what? Who needs a method for math? It's math. Step one, do the problem. Next, right? That's what people think, like what kind of method is there for math? But tell me in the chat, what is something that is different about the PSAT compared to your typical high school math tests? See, in high school, your teachers are going to try to test your knowledge of math. So you have to know some pretty deep math by the end of the year to be able to do well on the tests. And typically, in high school math, timing isn't that big of a problem. I mean, sure, if you're really clueless, then you will run out of time on your high school math tests. But usually there's enough time to finish if you have any semblance of an idea of what you're doing. The PSAT is a totally different style of test. So first of all, the test makers are not that interested in how good you are at math. What they are interested in is how good you are at critical problem solving. So can you see a problem? Can you take in a bunch of information and come up with a creative way to solve it? The other thing is that the test is mostly multiple choice. There are some grid-ins, but most of it's multiple choice. So the format allows you to maybe find a more efficient path than what you could do on a fill-in-the-blank test, which is what most of your high school tests are. In fact, we're going to see it quite often that if you just go on autopilot and start like turning into an algebra robot on every question automatically, you're going to solve some questions less efficiently than you would if you took advantage of the format of the test. And then finally, on the PSAT, the timing is significant. So whereas in high school, timing is not a big deal, on the PSAT, like the timing is instituted very tightly to really reward people who know how to do the problems well, and to, not reward your competition who didn't prep and so has to spend a lot of time figuring out every problem. So there's a lot that's different about the PSAT, which means that our old approach to math, which is step one, do the problem, doesn't really work that well. So what is step one? Well, step one is to take stock of the important information in the problem. Don't even worry about solving the question at first. Just say, okay, well, what's here? Okay, I got an equation with x, an equation with y, and the answer choices are fractions. Or I just have an equation, the answer choices are numbers. Or there's graphs, or whatever. There's a lot of words I'm going to have to translate. Figure out what you have. And then, once you have taken stock of the information, you decide on the best strategy for answering that question, which might mean skipping the question. Maybe you take stock of the information and you go, uh-oh, I got no idea how to do this. I'm lost. Okay, no need to panic. Then your best strategy is to guess randomly and move on. There's never, ever, ever a need to panic on the PSAT. Math is a test that a lot of people freak out on. People look at a question and start to hyperventilate or start to feel that like sick, cold feeling in your stomach, like, oh no, everything's about to go terribly wrong. Don't panic on the test. If you can do the problem, do the problem. If you can't do the problem, skip the problem. There's no reason to ever panic on this exam. Now, the last thing you should do is check to make sure that you've answered the right question, or as I like to call it, the final question. So if you got that x is 5, congratulations. But is x what the test makers wanted? Did the test makers want x, or maybe they wanted y? Maybe they wanted x minus 4. I mean, who knows? So check to make sure that you have not only an answer, but the answer to the question before you commit to bubbling a choice. I will mention, too, that a lot of people, when we get to step 3, think that we're saying, check your work. That's not what we're saying. We do not advise checking your work because, as many of you very sagely noted earlier, this is a timed test and the timing is pretty tight. So you don't want to sit there and spend a minute checking over every single bit of algebra. Your attitude should be that you're a rock star. You got that x is 5? Well, that means it is 5 because you're awesome. So if the test makers wanted 5 or wanted x and 5 is a choice, then just pick it and move on. Trust the work that you've done. If you've made a mistake, well, maybe none of the answer choices will match your answer, then you'll know you made a mistake. But if you practice, you should always practice the behaviors that confident test takers take, even if you aren't a confident test taker yet. And what confident test takers do is trust their work, don't second guess themselves, and just pick the answer and go. So that is a quick look at the Kaplan method for math, and we're going to be applying this to not only the questions that we do today, but to all the questions that we do in all of our math lessons. Today, the questions that we do are going to focus on linear equations. And this is something that you have surely done in algebra in school, so mostly what you'll need is a quick review. So let's take a look at one. Which value of x satisfies the equation above? All right, folks, let me know, please, in the chat. What is your strategy for dealing with this equation? We have an equation. We have answer choices that are all negative numbers, and it's on to step 2. We got to figure out the best approach to solve this thing. So one of the things that you always want to do when you have a linear equation is get rid of fractions. Even if you don't exactly know how you're going to solve it all the rest of the way, your first stop is always to get rid of the fractions in the equation because fractions are just totally the worst. So here, we can multiply both sides of the equation by 6 because that will make the fractions go away, right? If you do a 1/2 times a 6, it turns into a 3. And if you do 1/6 times 6, it turns into a 1. And now we don't have fractions anymore. So we're going to do that. We're going to multiply through by 6. And you can see on the screen, everything stayed the same. It's just that the 1/2 became a 3, and the 1/6 went away completely because it turned into a 1, and 1 times anything doesn't change anything. So now at this point, this is a much easier equation to solve. You can just distribute the 3. 3 times 3x plus 17 becomes 9x plus 51. And now we just got to isolate x. So you're going to subtract 8x from both sides, subtract 51 from both sides, and get that x is negative 61. Check to make sure on test day that this is really the final answer. We have x, sure, but is it what the test makers wanted? And the answer is yes, it is, because the test makers did ask for the value of x. So we can go ahead, circle choice A on test day, confirm it, and move on with the PSAT. So in this one, I saw a few folks suggesting that we plug the answer choices back into the problem and see which one is right. That will work. That is a strategy that will work on this problem. However, it's going to be even faster to do the algebra because the algebra here is so straightforward. You just got to know one step. Get rid of fractions. If you know to always get rid of fractions in your linear equations, then they're never going to be difficult to solve, and you can do it faster than plugging the answer choices in to find the problem by reverse engineering. All right, folks, nice work on that problem. So we ran through that one pretty quickly together. I know that algebra is something that you have done, but if it's been a while, if you got to clear some cobwebs from your head, then take a moment and try question number 2 entirely on your own. This is a more challenging question than the one that we just did, and I'm going to give you a minute to solve it. So give it your best shot in 1 minute. When 60 seconds are up, we're going to review it like there ain't nothing to it. I'll show you some more cool tricks, and we're going to get our answer. I'll see you guys back here in 60 seconds. And as many of you found, by the way, there's a vote down below the chat. So feel free to vote when you have an answer. And that way we can see what you responded, and we know which answer choices are worth reviewing. All right, guys, I'll see you back here in a minute. Try this question now on your own. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's review this question. So we have a little bit of a tug of war between choice A and choice B at the moment. So we got to figure out which one of those is right. I'm going to say this. If you get a question wrong in any of our PSAT Prep Live sessions, don't beat yourself up. Don't be like, oh no, I'm stupid. I should have gotten that right. I'm terrible. Everything's awful. I'm bad at math. Don't. Instead, your attitude should be, dodged a bullet. Thank goodness there was something I didn't know how to do. And I found out in class that I didn't know how to do it. That's a way better time to find out that you don't know something than on test day when it's possibly costing you a National Merit Scholarship. So it's good. Don't beat yourself up. Be ecstatic when you get mistakes out of your system in practice. So here's the deal. This one is a little bit different from the previous one because in step 1, we notice a couple of things. First of all, this equation is ridiculously obnoxious with fractions like 101 out of 220. That is just a major pain to deal with in fraction form. Number 2, a difference is that this time the word approximate is in the question, so that means we don't need an exact answer, but rather an approximate one. And you'll notice that the answer choices are all decimals. There's not a single nice number here. They're all decimal values. That is your clue on test day that you should actually simplify those pesky fractions as decimals and work with this problem in decimal form instead of fraction form, taking advantage of your calculator. As I mentioned earlier, you can always feel free to use your calculator in PSAT Prep Live unless we tell you otherwise. So let's try it out. When we work through the values as decimals, we end up with this form, right? The 101 out of 220 ends up being about 0.46. And the 8 over 9 ends up being about 0.89, right? Because that's 0.8 repeating, so it's about 0.89. We're also going to do what we learned in the previous problem, which is multiply through by 7 to clear out the fractions. So the fractions are gone, the ridiculous fractions are now decimals, And we know that strategically it's okay because the answer choices are decimals and because the question said approximately. If it didn't say approximately and if the answer choices were all fractions, you'd want to leave it in the form of a fraction. This is why it's important to prepare for the PSAT. You want to understand how the test makers write questions and how to tell what you are and are not allowed to do strategically when solving them. So now it's just simple algebra, right? We just distribute the 8, distribute the 28, combine like terms, and isolate. So we end up getting 6.8. This point on test day, we're going to grab choice D for domination and move on with the PSAT. So you can see that neither of the two choices that was involved in our original tug of war was correct. This was a very, very difficult question. It's the uppermost tier of difficulty that you can see. And yet, at the end of the day, there's nothing beyond your grasp on this problem. You can make a mistake in practice and totally get it right on test day. You just got to remember to get rid of fractions, simplify into decimals when the answer choices are decimals, and then after that point, it's just straightforward algebra with combining like terms and isolating. So we're just going to go ahead, grab D for domination at the end, and move on with the PSAT. I see Jody's excited. She got it right. Nice job. If you got this one right, give yourself some mad props, because most people on test day will get it wrong. So if you've got the presence of mind to work strategically and get it right, you're going to be way ahead of your competition. All right, now folks, this question is, and like the last one, is just a plain old linear equation. You just plop, get an equation, and you got to solve it. But the PSAT is interested in giving you equations in different forms so that they can test your creative problem solving in different ways. Here is a quick review of linear graphs, because one of the most basic ways to take a linear equation and add some kind of spice to it is to put it in the coordinate plane. So let's review some of our rules for linear graphs. The best equation for a graph is the slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. The reason that this is the greatest equation to use in the PSAT is that it gives you a lot of information about the line. So for those of you who recall, let me know in the chat, what are the m and the b in the slope-intercept form? So here the m is the slope. It tells you how quickly the line moves up relative to how quickly it moves over. And then the b is the y-intercept. And if you're thinking like, oh, God, what is slope? I forgot. It's been forever since geometry class. So here it is. Slope is the difference between the y-coordinates divided by the difference between the x-coordinates of 2 points. So you need 2 points to find slope. And when you have 2 points, you just plug in the y-coordinates, plug in the x-coordinates, and then divide the differences by each other to get the slope. Always remember to put the vertical distance, which is the difference between the y-coordinates, on top, because it's rise over run, how much you're going up or down, divided by how much you're going left or right. Now, when you have a positive slope, the line is going to increase as you look at it from left to right. So if a line goes up as you look from left to right, that is a positive slope. And if a line goes down as you look left to right, that is a negative slope. Conceptually, what this means is that the line is either increasing or decreasing, depending on whether its slope is positive or negative. So let's take a look at a question together, which is a straightforward question, before I give you a really mean, difficult question to try entirely on your own. Here it is. Which of the following graphs shows the graph of the line y equals 4x plus 7? Now, in a high school math class, what you would do is you would graph this equation, right? You would just have to graph it, and then you would give your picture to the teacher as your answer. So a lot of people do this on autopilot on the PSAT. They will start to graph the line. But if you follow the problem strategically, right? Step 1, take stock of your information. You cannot possibly miss the fact that the answer choices are graphs, which then when you look at step 2, pick the best strategy for answering the question. Clearly, using elimination is going to be way faster than drawing the graph from scratch. Let me know in the chat, folks, what are some answer choices that we can eliminate here? Because they just don't have the right y-intercept. It's just not 7 like it is in the equation. You look at A, you look at B and C, and they're all sort of in the right ballpark for 7. I mean, you kind of have to squint a little bit, but they might be 7. But, like, definitely not D, right? D has the line crossing the y-axis below 0. So D is out. There's just no way that that y-intercept is 7. And then do the same thing with the slope. Right? We know the slope is 4 because that's the number attached to the x. So that is a positive thing. Any answer choice with a negative slope is wrong. And remember, you always look from left to right. If you're like me and you always get mixed up, which is positive slope, which is negative slope, just remember that you always look from left to right. So when you look from left to right at choices B and C, which I see many of you wanting to eliminate here, you realize that they go down. So there's no way that they have a positive slope of 4. So that means that C and B are wrong. And even without drawing the line, you know that choice A for awesome has to be the correct answer. Circle that choice and move on with the PSAT. When you do problems that have complicated answer choices, elimination is often the best way to solve the question. But the overarching takeaway is don't go on autopilot. Don't just always start to do the problem the high school math way to make your math teacher proud, because on the PSAT, it's often not necessary. The same thing is actually true for the next question, although this one is a bit more challenging. I'm going to go ahead and give you a minute to try this question entirely on your own. When time is up, we're going to review it, show you some cool tricks for beating it, and then move on to the next topic. See you guys soon. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's review this question. So I'm seeing a lot of answers for C, and most of us are going for choice D. So we have, again, a disagreement. Did the underdogs have their day with C, or was D the correct answer? Let's find out. So on this problem, there's a whole bunch of text, but if you're a strategic test taker, you realize that none of that text really matters. All you really have to do is figure out, like, which of these equations matches the line shown. The fact that Jacques Charles was a French scientist makes absolutely no difference to anything. Now, when you look at these answer choices, you'll notice that all of them have the same format. They're all in slope-intercept form. And not only that, but all of them have the same slope. So what's the only factor of this graph that you have to consider in order to determine the correct answer? Well, if they all have the same slope, and the only thing that slope-intercept form has is slope and intercept, then apparently the only thing that I have to consider is the y-intercept. Notice they all have a different y-intercept, which means that if I can figure out the y-intercept of this graph, as Bria, John, Mina, and several folks have noted, I will have my answer. So now let's just figure out what the y-intercept is. The thing about graphs is that we expect the origin to be in the bottom left corner. Right? You expect the bottom left corner of a graph to be the point 0, 0. And if you have that expectation, then you're going to extend the line that's given and realize that it's going to, it's going to cross the y-intercept somewhere negative, which is why many people voted for choice D. But here's the problem. That left corner is not the origin. The origin is actually where those two lines intersect. In fact, I'm going to extend the vertical one so you can see more clearly. What's in red is the coordinate plane. So the PSAT basically took the window through which you were looking at the graph and like shifted it so that the origin was not in its usual place. PSAT! A lot of people get really mad when the PSAT does tricks like this because it's frustrating to fall for a trick. It's frustrating to get a question wrong. But you gotta get the mindset of it's good that there are tricks, because if there were no tricks on test day, everybody would get the questions right. But if there's tricks for your competition to fail on and get the question wrong, while you don't fall for the tricks because you've already practiced it, you got the falling for it out of your system in practice, that means that now there's something other people get wrong that you get right. So those people are knocking themselves out of the competition for the national merit finalist standing, and you're more likely to get it yourself. So now we can find the y-intercept easily. Of course, if the if the coordinate plane is highlighted, it's clear that the y-intercept is right there where I've circled in blue, and that is a simple positive 1. So this time the underdog has had their day with choice C. We click on that choice, confirm it, and move on with the PSAT. Now I love what David just put in the chat. David says, gosh darn it, that's what I chose first. I'm sure I'm not the first person in your life who's told you this, but this is good advice, even if it is old advice. Always trust your first instinct. It's better to trust your first instinct and sometimes be wrong than to second guess yourself, sometimes be wrong anyway, and on top of that have all the stress and anxiety of second guessing yourself. It's just a really clear win for always trusting your first instinct, because the mistakes you make every now and then with your first instinct are totally worth the value derived by not second guessing yourself all the time and slowing yourself down with self-doubt. That's one of the first steps to becoming a confident test taker and putting test anxiety behind you and leaving it in the past. All right, folks, that was it for question number 4. So we saw one of the things that test makers can do to make your process more complicated for solving linear equations. The other main thing, of course, is to just have 2 equations in the same problem, right? So that's what we call systems of equations. So the question can look like this. If 6a plus 6b equals 30 and 3a plus 2b equals 14, what are the values of a and b? Now let me know in the chat, ladies and gentlemen, when you've solved systems of equations in the past, what has been your favorite method? What is what you're typically drawn to when it comes time to solve a system of equations? This is done with 2 different ways, right? You got your elimination strategy, and then of course you can do the substitution strategy. And if you grew up in Ohio like I did, or some other regions, you might call it combination instead of elimination, but those are the same thing. So I will tell you a little secret about the PSAT. Consider this like a PSAT hack, if you will. On the PSAT, the problems are usually designed to be done quicker with elimination than with substitution. Not saying substitution's bad. I'm just saying it's usually a little bit faster with elimination than substitution. So if you've normally done substitution, if that's like your go-to method, I recommend just in practice giving elimination a shot. It's not that different or that hard. And then you can save yourself some time on test day that your competition isn't going to have. So I'll show you how to do elimination here. What we want to do is basically set up the second equation so that something about it matches one of the variables in the first equation. And there's 4 different ways you could do it in this case. Let me know in the chat, what is one of the options I have to set up that second equation and get it ready to eliminate? You can either multiply it by 2 or negative 2, so that 6a and 3a match up. Or you can multiply it by 3, so that the 6b matches up with the 2b. So those are your 2 main options in this case. Now I'm going to show you another little hack here, which is to look at the answer choices and let the answer choices guide you in what you decide. Notice that when you look at the answer choices, the b's are the same in 2 of the choices. There are 2 choices that have a 1 for b, which is fine. But when you look at the A's, you'll see that the A's are all different. So if you get rid of the B's and solve for A, you will immediately have the answer and you will not need to plug it back in to get the other variable. You'll just be able to go straight into it. So in this particular case, multiplying by 3 or by negative 3 is just that much strategically superior because it makes the B's go away and then the A's remain, and then we're going to be done. So notice how efficiently we can use the answer choices, take advantage of the format of the test to beat the test. Okay, so here we do times negative 3. You could do either negative 3 or positive 3. And the second equation becomes negative 9a minus 6b equals negative 42. Don't forget to multiply the number on the right by what you multiply by. That was always my downfall. I would just be like, it's 14, and I'd forget to multiply by negative 3. But if I do this correctly, let me know in the chat, folks. What do I now do with these two equations in order to get one of my variables to eliminate? Hence the name of the strategy. Nice job. I'm seeing from the poll voting, a lot of you guys got this. Beautifully done. We add the two equations together. So the b's cancel. Now, 6a plus negative 9a is negative 3a, and 30 plus negative 42 is negative 12. We divide both sides by negative 3 and get that a equals 4. So we got a equals 4, but don't rush. You gotta ask yourself, is this the final answer? And the answer is yes, it is the final answer, because the test makers wanted a and b. We got a. Only one answer choice has a, so bam! Finally, it's about darn tootin' time we got choice B for Boris. Circle it and move on with the PSAT. So this is the systems of equations that you might see on the PSAT. We'll do some more of that later in the session when we also have to translate in addition to solving the system. But for now, I want to show you a couple of other tricks that can happen when the PSAT gives you systems of equations. One possibility is that the PSAT will give you a problem like this. In the system of equations shown, z represents a constant. If the system of equations has infinitely many solutions, what's the value of z? So in this problem, we have a little bit of a twist, right? There's three variables. There's q, there's s, and there's z. But we only have two equations, so we're not going to be able to solve for z, q, and s using either substitution or elimination. So on these problems, what the PSAT is assessing is your ability to think critically. Let me know in the chat, folks. When a pair of equations has infinitely many solutions, what does that mean? Infinitely many solutions. I see Cyrus saying, or not Cyrus, Sir Awesome saying to graph it. What it really means is that if you were to graph it, it would be just the same line on top of itself, right? Infinitely many solutions means it's the same exact line. Yeah, exactly, Zayad. These two equations equal each other. So all we really have to do on this problem is make them look more similar and keep in mind that they must be equal. So folks, what am I going to multiply that first equation by in order to make it look equal to the second equation? Yeah, think about it like this. How do I turn a 1/5 into an 8? And the answer is I'm going to multiply by 40, because 40 divided by 5 equals 8. Very nice. I see a lot of you got it. Excellent. So we're going to multiply that first equation by 40. Now, when we multiply by 40, let's do it to each part. 40 times 1/8 is 5. 40 times 1/5 is 8. And 40 times 40 is 1600. So now these two equations look really, really similar to each other. And we know that they're not just similar to each other, they must be exactly the same. So what does z need to be in order for these two equations to be exactly the same? Well, it's got to be 5. Like if z was 6, wouldn't be the same. If z was 2, it wouldn't be the same. But if z is 5, these two equations are exactly the same. And we're done. That's the final answer. Woo! 2 B's in a row. Grab choice B for Boris. Move on with the PSAT. Now, I know some of you guys are going to have a question. Well, what if instead of saying infinitely many solutions, it had said, what if there are no solutions? That's the other possibility on the PSAT. So I want to just quickly point that out, just in case any of you guys have seen that in your practice and it's been driving you crazy. When it has no solutions, then what's going to happen is that the number to the right will be different in both equations, but everything else will be the same. So your strategy doesn't change. You still make the two equations look similar to each other. You try to make it so that all the coefficients are the same, but the number to the right of the equal sign will be different, and you just ignore it. When there's no solutions, it means you have parallel lines. Parallel lines have the same slope, which means the y coefficients are the same and the x coefficients are the same. So here, you know, if one of the equations had been like 5q plus 8s equals 1200, and then 5q plus 8s equals 1600, then it would have been no solution, but the process is going to be exactly the same. You would still multiply them both by 40 to get them both to be 8s. So it's a really cool thing where even if you don't quite get it conceptually, you can just memorize the rote process for solving these problems, which is multiply one of the equations by something to get the coefficients to line up, just as if you were setting up for combination or elimination, and then that'll give you your answer. All right, folks, that was one of the tricks the PSAT can do. I'm going to give you another problem that tests a systems of equations trick without telling you what the trick is. I know, it's very mean of me. If you'd be so kind, folks, try this question entirely on your own in 1 minute, do it by whatever means you'd like to try, and then vote for your answer in the poll. When time is up, we're going to review it and see a really cool technique for approaching a question like this on the PSAT. Good luck and enjoy the practice. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's review this question. Tell me, please, in the chat, what was something that you discovered while doing this system of equations problem that maybe the previous problems hadn't prepared you for? What was something about this one that was kind of a twist? I see Ben in the chat was saying, like, I don't know, like this one can be really frustrating for a variety of reasons. One is that nothing really works that well. Like if you look at these two equations, substitution's not going to work very well because none of the variables are naked. They all have a different coefficient. And elimination's not going to be that great either because in the two equations, there's never a case where like the coefficient in one is a multiple of the coefficient in the other. Like the 2b and 3b don't really line up, and the 5c and the 4c don't really line up either. So if you do elimination, you have to multiply both equations to get them both to get in line with each other. So this is a really, really difficult problem for that reason. But let me show you a little telltale sign that the PSAT will sometimes use. That is your clue in the darkness, that there's a really, really easy way to solve this question. Check it out. The test makers are not asking what B is, and they're not asking you what C is. They're asking you what B plus C is. And this is a clue that what you should do is combine the equations as they are and not try to solve them using a standard technique. Whenever you're asked for the sum of variables or a difference of variables, just see what happens if you add the equations together or subtract one from the other. Don't even know if that's going to be the right way to do it, but just see what happens if you try. Like in this particular case, if we add the two equations together, let me know in the chat, folks, what do we get? What do we get when we add negative 2b plus 5c equals 15, and then the other equation, 3b minus 4c? Aha, very nice. And exactly, we just get b, because negative 2b plus 3b is b, plus c, because 5c minus 4c is c. And then on the other side, exactly, Vanessa, very nice, Courtney, absolutely Irish, we get 27. 15 plus 12 is 27. And we're done, because the question wanted b plus c. We got b plus c, grab choice D for domination, and move on with the PSAT. So that takes like, what, 10 seconds on test day? This is why the PSAT is not best approached as a math test. In a high school math class, you know, you probably wouldn't be asked for b plus c. Your teacher would just be like, here's two equations, what's b, what's c? And you'd have to do like some really obnoxious grinding work to figure them out. But on the PSAT, when there's multiple answer choices and the test makers are more interested in your creativity and creative problem solving rather than just your pure math, They're basically giving you a reward if you know the right way to solve this problem over someone who doesn't know the right way by giving you a ton of extra time. So remember this, folks, whenever you're asked for the sum or the difference of variables, that is a clue that maybe you don't actually have to solve for each variable individually, but you should instead just try combining the equations and just see what happens when you do that. If it doesn't work, fine, go back and do it the long way. But chances are it will work because it's the PSAT after all. All right, folks, we've now seen a whole bunch of stuff to do with linear equations. We've done just straight up solving of linear equations. We've done linear equations in graphs. We've done linear equations when there's systems and when you have like no solution or infinitely many solutions. The last thing that we want to take a look at are word problems, because of course the PSAT is chock full of those. And when you do a word problem, a major component of it is translating the text that you're given into equations that you can use. So let's take a look at one together, and that will be our final problem of the hour. And congratulations, you will then have survived your first hour of PSAT Prep Live. Here we go. At a snack stand, hot dogs cost $3.50 and burgers cost $5. The snack stand sold 27 snacks and made $118.50 in revenue. How many hot dogs were sold? How many hamburgers? Okay, well, here we obviously have got two different variables, right? We got the number of hot dogs and we have the number of hamburgers. So that's our information in step one. We have all these facts about hot dogs and hamburgers, and we have to try to figure out how many of each were sold. Now let me know in the chat, what do you think would be some good variable names to use for our dogs and our hamburgers? I like Sid's comment here. Wow, this is going so fast. Thought it would be the longest hour of my life. Well, I am happy that we could disprove your expectations, Sid, and show you that, hey, maybe there is a path to greatness on the PSAT. Yeah, so we want to do something like X and Y, or maybe D and B, but we don't want to use the letter H. Now, the problem with H is that there's a non-zero probability that if you use H, at some point in the problem, you're going to get mixed up whether you meant H as in hot dog or H as in hamburger. So if you want to do abstract variables, X and Y, and like make a little marking next to the words, you know, which one's which, that is a great way to do it. If you want to be creative and say, well, okay, so if I ignore the H part, there's dogs and burgers, so let's do D and B, that also works really well, and then it's easier to remember. But the main takeaway here is if you have two things with the same first letter, don't use that first letter for either one of them. Just pretend that doesn't even exist at all, and that reduces your chances of making errors. Now let's write some equations, folks. We have 27 snacks sold total. Let me know in the chat, please, if we sold a total of 27 snacks, then what equation can we derive from our variables here? The D for the hot dogs sold and the B for the hamburgers sold. What we can do is say, well, 27 snacks were sold. So if I take the number of dogs and I add to them the number of burgers, I should get 27. And very nice. Milan, excellent. Daria, very nice. Ethan and Bria, yep, we're going to do D plus B equals 27. So that's our first equation. Now our second equation has to come from the pricing information. So we know that hot dogs were $3.50 each and hamburgers were $5 each. To find the total amount of money that you get from selling something, you multiply the cost times the number of things that you sold. So here, folks, what's the other equation that we can write about the hot dogs and the hamburgers to reflect the price, the money that we made? So we take 3.5, which is the price per hot dog, and multiply it by D, the number of hot dogs, to get the cash that we made from our dogs. We do the same thing for burgers. $5 per burger times B burgers sold means we made $5B from our hamburgers. When we add those two together, that should be our total revenue for the snack stand, in this case, $118.50. So there's our other equation. 3.5D plus 5B equals 118.5. All right, a lot of you guys got this. Very nice. Maggie, Rohan, Lisa, take care. Very nice work here. Well done. So now we got to pick a method for solving the system. And again, on the PSAT, it's generally set up so that it is a little bit faster with elimination / combination than it is with substitution. So here we got to multiply the first equation by something to prep it for elimination. Let me know in the chat, folks. What are we going to multiply that equation by to get ready to eliminate? Nice. We can do either a multiplication by 3.5 or a multiplication by 5. Either one will work. But in this case, because 5 is a whole number and we don't have to, involve any decimals if we do 5, it's a little bit easier to make the b's cancel. We'll multiply by -5 here and add the two equations. If you wanted to multiply by +5 and subtract the equations, totally cool. Do whatever you feel most comfortable with. But the bottom line is that you're trying to make one of the variables cancel out. In this case, it is the b. Nice job, everybody. So let's add. -5 plus 3.5 is -1.5, and -135 plus 118.5 is -16.5. And feel free to use your calculator. This has been asked a few times today, but you can always use your calculator in PSAT Prep Live unless we tell you otherwise. We divide both sides by 1.5, or -1.5, and we get that 11 was the number of dogs. Now this eliminates choices A and B because they don't have the right number of dogs. But on top of that, I saw a few folks noting earlier in the chat that there's another hack here, right? We know the total number of snacks is 27, so we can eliminate off the bat any answer choices that don't add up to 27. So we can just stop and get rid of C and pick D, right? There's no need to do any work or any plugging in or anything like that. D is just the only choice left because of our combination of algebra and creative problem solving, critical thinking. Let's grab that choice, D for domination, and move on with the PSAT. Now, folks, that is our last question. Our next session is coming up on the hour, and I will give you a break. But because it is our very, very first session, I do want to take a little bit of time here, since we have the time in this session, to just chat with you a little bit about how to prep for the PSAT. This is the first step of your journey to PSAT greatness, and I want to give you some tips that will help you all throughout your preparation. So one, of course, is after going to one of our sessions, when you review, it's a really good idea to review the methods and the strategies that you learned in that session. That way you can start practicing them. And when you get good at using those strategies, you'll find that you're faster and more accurate when solving the questions. So that kind of makes sense. One other thing that we recommend is to make sure you take a full-length practice test. This will let you put into action the strategies that you've learned under timed conditions, and it will also tell you how you're doing, which is very, very important because you want to know, am I hitting my target or do I need to keep studying and working harder? When you work on the PSAT, you should always review all your questions. Review every single question that you do because that will tell you what you're good at and what you're weak at. It will also let you learn from all the questions that you solve. A lot of people will take a practice test and it will go badly, and then they're like, oh, I never want to look at that test ever again. But in reality, if you were to look at that test and discover that there were, 10 questions that you messed up for stupid reasons, and you can totally get those questions right next time, it's actually a confidence boost. It's a nice confidence boost knowing that next time you can do something different and get a higher score. So don't be afraid to look at questions you got wrong because you can learn from those. Don't be afraid to look at questions that you got right because maybe there was a better way to do it. And even though you got it right, you can improve on it and do better in the future. So review all of the questions that you do, figure out what you're good at and what you're weak at. And then especially if there's something that comes up a lot and you're weak at it, that's what we call the high yield question types for you. Meaning question types that give you a lot of value for the amount of time that you've spent studying. The more that something is a weakness and the more often it appears in the test, the more valuable it is for you to study. A lot of people, for example, get really freaked out over combinations and permutations, but it's not a high yield area. There's not that many of those questions in the PSAT, so don't freak out over that. But if your algebra is weak, that is worth improving because then you know that if you can get better at it, it will help you get a ton of questions right on test day. So don't just hammer out every single one of your weaknesses. Specifically focus on the ones that are worth the most points in the PSAT and work on those. And lastly, this may seem a little bit cheesy, but think positively. I've seen students who were smart enough to do well, worked hard enough to do well, but didn't end up doing as well as they really deserved because they were just so negative. They didn't want to be doing it, they hated the test, they were mad at themselves, they had low self-esteem, low confidence, and they just were distracted. They just didn't get the value out of studying because they were so negative. Really embrace your mistakes. Embrace your failure. Be like, yes, I screwed up. Thank goodness. Better now than on test day. Now, what can I learn from this? If you have that positive attitude, if you believe that you can improve, and if you really believe that all the mistakes you make are valuable, it will be just easier to motivate yourself to study and get a higher score in the end. So that is a quick look at strategies for how to prep for the PSAT. And also for some of you, that'll be it for PSAT prep for the day. And if so, Thank you for coming. It has been a pleasure working with you this hour. This has been a really energetic and fun group of folks, so I appreciated the chance to work with you, and I wish you all the best of luck in your ongoing prep. But if you're sticking around, coming up on the hour, we're going to have our first session on reading. We're going to introduce you to the Kaplan method for reading comprehension. We're going to show you one of each of the different types of passages, and I'm also going to give you an entire passage to practice on your own. There's a lot of value there. Reading is a scary area for a lot of folks, so if you have the time to stick around, then please do. And we'll have some reading practice coming up right your way. See you guys soon, and take care.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to PSAT Prep Live here with us at Kaplan. I'm Kaplan instructor Stephanie. I'm so excited to see so many of you have stuck around after Boris's last session on math. Great to have you all here with us today. We've got a fantastic team for those of you who are just joining us, ensuring that you have a wonderful experience these next 60 minutes while we delve into PSAT reading. So many of you have already been there in the chat talking with Katie. We've got Beth, Julia, Joe, David is here as well. Like I say, many of you just saw my colleague Boris. We've also got Greg behind the scenes making sure that everything works off. So hello, everyone. Hi there, Varun. Hi there, Travis. I see Logan back. Welcome, welcome. So here's what we're doing. For those of you who were just here for our last hour, then you've seen this already, but for those of you who are just joining us now, before we delve into the reading test, I want to give you a little bit of an overview about the PSAT generally, just so that you can understand how it fits into all of these standardized tests that you may have been hearing about or maybe taking, in fact, quite soon. So the PSAT is, like I say, standardized. So you heard Boris say this for those of you who are here, but it's always going to appear in the exact same order. Now, today we are talking about the very first thing that you are going to see on test day, and that is that 60-minute reading test that has 47 associated questions. Now, after that, you're also going to see the writing and language test, and together these two components are going to, your score for both of them will sum up to your evidence-based reading and writing score. Now, the second 50% of your score is coming from math, and you can see here that there are, in fact, two different math tests. There's the no calculator test. That one actually comes first. That's 25 minutes. And then you have that 45-minute calculator test, and that's going to be another 55% of your score for a whopping total of 2 hours and 45 minutes. So if you're sticking with us for all 2 hours of today's PSAT Prep Live programming, then you are, in fact, building some good stamina for that close to 3-hour test that you'll be taking sometime soon in October. Now, like I say, these are collectively across multiple choice and grid-ins. Now, in the math you see here, grid-ins are, in essence, kind of, they're fill in the blank, if you will. They're not completely open-ended because you will, of course, be bubbling in. You have 4 different spaces, but you don't have multiple choice components. Now, in today's reading section, which we're talking about, every single question on the reading test is multiple choice. Let's talk about how it's scored. You may have heard, and sometimes this still persists out there. I still hear some students talking about wrong answers and why you should never guess or why you need to skip. The fact of the matter is there is no wrong answer penalty. This is true of the PSAT. This is true of the SAT. Basically, what this means is that if you get a question wrong, you get 0 points. If you skip a question, you get 0 points. So you're really out nothing for guessing, because worst case scenario, you get 0 points, but you have increased the odds that you will guess correctly. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that you can get answers wrong, and that's the same thing as getting questions right. If you get a question right, you get positive numbers of points. But what we're talking about here is you don't get points deducted away from your score for getting questions wrong. Now, you're also going to see on your score report these 10 to 40 range scores for each of those tests, but the ones that you're likely most interested in are the 1600 to 1760. Add those two scores up. Like I say, 50% comes from writing, language, and reading. The other 50% comes from math for a whopping total of 320 to 1520. You'll notice this is a little bit lower than the SAT, and that's because the PSAT is somewhat shorter and the question difficulty isn't quite as advanced as on the SAT. So these scores are, in fact, completely scalable. If you get a 1520 on the PSAT, that means that you can anticipate getting a 1520 thereabouts on the SAT. So this way, it's nice and easy to compare your performance on the PSAT to the SAT. Now, if you are curious about what the PSAT can do for you, it can be more than just a practice test. In fact, if you are hoping to use the PSAT for SAT practice, I'd say there's some fantastic good SAT practice tests out there. Here at Kaplan, we have practice SAT events all the time. So the PSAT in and of itself is also used for national merit. If you have one of the top 1,000 scores of your individual state, you are eligible to earn some fairly lucrative scholarships to pay for your college education. So you're like, why should I be studying for the PSAT? Particularly those of you who are joining us who are quite younger than, say, the 11th graders who you may be taking at your juniors. That's when it counts. Studying for the PSAT can, set you up for success early. For those of you who are juniors, I don't want to stress about it. Because the PSAT can be a fantastic progress. You don't lose anything from taking the PSAT. Best case scenario, you are eligible for that scholarship. Worst case scenario, you have identified your strengths and opportunities that you can then be studying and refining and fine-tuning so that you can, of course, achieve that goal you're looking for on the SAT. Now, the PSAT is only offered once a year. It only counts when you take it as a junior for that scholarship. You can, of course, take practice PSATs, but like I said, if you're using the PSAT to study for the SAT, they're very, very similar. The SAT, of course, is a little bit more advanced, a little bit longer, and there's lots of great SAT resources out there for you as well. All right, so that's a little bit of an overview of the PSATs. For those of you who are going to be joining us for all of our PSAT Prep Live programming, you'll hear that quite a bit. But let's get into the specific meat of our hour-long session here on PSAT reading strategies. Now, by the end of the session, you will know the 3 different types of passages on the PSAT. Now, this is not just trivia. You don't have to be like, guess what, mom, dad, friend, brother, sibling, I know all the 3 different types of passages on the PSAT. Good for me. This can, in fact, help you adjust your passage mapping approach. That's really the essence of this hour-long session, is how to actively and effectively read through passages, identifying keywords and central ideas. We're going to talk about what this means in just a moment. This will allow you to predict an answer and find a map. So what we're talking about is how to approach the reading passages on test day. Now, what are we currently doing? It's confession time here. Go ahead, let us know in the chat. Now, as soon as I ask this, I do want to point out this is a moderated chat. There's quite a number of us here. Rest assured that we see every single one of your chat responses. So if you're responding and it doesn't appear right away, it can be just many of you may have identical or similar responses, and we don't need to put all of those there in the chat. But how do you currently approach it? Are you doing questions first? Maybe you've heard that you should do questions first. Are you reading the passage? Are you skimming the passage? Do you think you should read the passage, but you really just don't want to? Do a little bit of both? Like, how are you currently approaching these reading passages? And for some of you may be like, well, I don't know, Stephanie. Tell me. I'm seeing quite a few of you are reading the questions first. Looks like some of you are reading the passage first. Now, for those of you who have heard questions first, follow-up question, because I'm seeing some of you are like really, really behind questions first. I think there was like caps lock, questions first. Lots of you doing questions. Read the questions, read the questions, read the questions. What's the rationale behind this? Because in about 2 minutes, you are going to know definitively what to do with regards to this passage first, question first dilemma. It's like the chicken or the egg. I've got an answer. Now, often when I say, why read the questions first? Many good-intentioned, well-intentioned individuals may have told you to read the questions first. Right? The idea behind this advice is, well, if you know what to look for, then you can find it. And that's good in theory. Right? If there were only 1 or 2 questions associated with each of these passages, I would say, yeah, go for it. Read the question first and then look over the passage and figure out what you need to read for. But you can see here that that's not the case. With each of these passages, you have somewhere between 9 and 10 questions each. There's really no good way to read over 9 to 10 questions and then like, okay, I got 10 ideas in my head now. I'm not going to forget them, and I'm going to read through the passage, and I'm going to be able to find 9 to 10 things. It's just not going to work. It's not realistic. Now, of course, you say, well, I'm just going to read 1 question at a time. I'm going to read 1 question. I'm going to go back to the passage. I'm going to find the answer to that question. Then I'm going to do the other question. I'm going to do that 9 to 10 times. Well, by this point, you've in fact expended way more time going back and forth than you would have if you had just read the passage to begin with. So what would you say if I told you today, right now, in this next session, I could tell you exactly what to look for in the passage without having ever seen the questions first. I know. It sounds too good to be true. And I know most things in life, when they are too good to be true, they are in fact not true. But here's the exception. There's always an exception to the rule, and this is the exception. Yeah. It is in fact possible to do this because this is a test. So what that means is that the same elements, the same concepts, the same key ideas are going to be in there. I am not crazy, the OG usernames. No, I am not crazy. It's about to happen right now. So you see these three different types of passages on the test. You're going to have one US and World Lit. You'll have 2 social studies and history, 2 science. One of those latter ones will be a paired passage set. However, the same ideas, concepts, elements are going to be tested every single time. It's not a matter of luck of the draw. Now, the passage itself will change, but the same concepts are always going to be tested. So here's our PSAT reading strategy. We're going to dig into these with a little bit new nuance. First thing you're going to read is the passage. You are going to actively read the passage first. Passage first! So we have solved the great debate. And you can read the passage first because right now I'm going to tell you what to look for so you can know exactly what to look for as you read that passage before you've ever seen the questions. By the time you get to the questions, you're going to be like, huzzah! I have already thought about half of these or more. This is amazing. My timing is so much better, and it'll be lovely. Now, after you read the passage and have thought about all of these elements that are going to be relevant, you can then go and look at the questions themselves. Now, the answer to every single question, though, is not found up here. It is, in fact, found back in the passage. So you're going to go back to the passage, and you can, in fact, predict your answer. Now, your prediction does not need to sound like a plausible answer choice. You don't need to phrase your prediction the way a test maker might phrase an answer choice. But what this means is that you're going back to the passage, and you are looking for that evidence. You're finding that proof. You're basically answering the question without looking at the answer options first. And that is going to be a big boon to those of you who are second guessers out here. So shout out to all my second guessers who are like, I always get stuck between C and D. And then I'm like, is it C and is it D? No, it's C. No, it's D. I'm going to pick C. And then you move on to the next question. And then you're like, oh my gosh, maybe I should have picked D. You're still stuck on that last question. If that is you, my second guessers, go back, predict the answer choice first, put it in your own words, put your finger on a part of the passage that says, here's my proof, match it up with an answer choice, don't even bother reading the others. You're like, this one matches up with what I thought, grab it, go, and move on. All right, let's talk about what to read for as you're actively reading. Now, active reading means 2 things. First of all, when we talk about action, often we're talking about taking notes. So grab that number 2 pencil. You will want to be taking margin notes, circling and underlining very specific things. But that's not the only activity involved in active reading. Active reading is an anticipatory exercise. It's not a summarization exercise. Often I get students that say, well, Stephanie, it just takes me so long to read a paragraph and then go, what did I just read about? Let me put it in my own words. Now, by the time you put it in your own words, you're like, okay, I'm writing this down. You're like, it takes so much longer to do it that way. And I will 100% agree with you. If that is what you are currently doing as active reading, then you're acting in that you are writing something down, but you're not actively reading in that you're anticipating what's coming next and using those context clues to get insight into the text. You're in fact doing kind of this, hindsight is 20/20. Now that I've read the paragraph, let me go think about what the author had said. Active reading is using these context clues, it's using topic sentence, it's using words that the author writes to think about why the author is writing that and where it's going to go. So for instance, tell me in the chat, topic sentence. What should a topic sentence do? This is what the topic sentences on test day will do. These are what your topic sentences should do when you are writing them. Because that's something you want to pay attention to. As you actively read, you think about that topic sentence. Now, a topic sentence should introduce the paragraph that you're about to read. So you look at that topic sentence, and then you say, aha, okay, this is a paragraph where the author is going to talk about whatever the topic is. You already know what the topic is. So now as you get that paragraph, you'll be like, okay, I was right. Nicely done, me. Good job. Self high five, pat on the back. But then maybe you come across a transition word or a keyword, something like but or however or although. And then you're like, okay, ears perk up. What is the author going to do? If I give you this sentence, the reason I like spaghetti is because you don't know the detail, like you don't know the exact words I'm about to speak about spaghetti, but you do know the general idea about what I'm about to say. Right? If I use the keyword because, then I'm about to give you a reason for why I like spaghetti. If I say, I usually like to eat spaghetti on Tuesdays, but, well, then you also know what's coming next. There's some reason that I didn't eat spaghetti this last Tuesday, or some difference, or some contrast. So looking for those transition words allows you to basically see where the author's going without even having to read those words. And I want to address what Anir says, I'm a really slow reader. Guess what? Being a fast reader is not a guarantee, and it's not a great strategy for improving your reading score on the PSAT. It has everything to do with reading efficiently and accurately, and knowing what matters, what to look for, and doing that accurately, consistently. It doesn't matter if you're the fastest reader in the world. If you're just reading with no objective, it's like if you're a fast runner with no direction. You're just running around. Where are you going? You're not going to get there any quicker than someone who slowly and methodically walks purposefully towards their destination. So think accuracy over speed. The other thing we want to pay attention to are things like opinion words, strongly charged language, and you can see that all of these are aligning up with some of our objectives. Why did the author write this particular thing? Was it a topic sentence? It's introducing. Is it a keyword? It's giving you a relationship. What side is the author taking? Look for those opinion words. Strongly charged, positively and negatively charged words provide us insight into the author's opinion and into the author's point of view. And then, of course, you want to take short, succinct notes. So short, succinct notes in the margin that capture those main ideas, those transition keywords. You can circle them or underline them. It's not the words themselves that matter. It's the relationship that they are providing. And of course, a key phrase. You might be saying, well, Stephanie, what's a key phrase? A key phrase is going to support the main idea. So key phrases are things like thesis statements or, in fact, articulations of the main idea. They are not details themselves. You don't need to get bogged down in all those details. So the questions themselves will go from broad to narrow. The first questions you'll see after you read the passage will ask you about the main idea, the main theme, things about the author generally. And as you move through those questions, you'll start to get more specific questions that might ask you about a line reference or a word or about a specific detail in the passage. All right, so focus on the why the author's writing. What's the author's purpose? What's the author's tone? What's the author's opinion? How has the author used relationship words to tie these things together? That is what you want to be focusing on, because that is what the questions are going to ask you about at the end. Now, you don't want to be underlining everything. I once went to a college bookstore. I was going to get a used textbook, and I thought, well, this will be great. I'm going to save myself some money. I picked up, it was like a 700-page book, and whoever had been the owner of that book had highlighted every single word in the textbook except for ands and its and does. If you highlight everything, you're just, in fact, on test day, if you circle and underline everything, all you're doing is scribbling all over the text. Now you can't even read what you need to see. So be judicious. Ask yourself, is it worthy of my pencil? Does it relate to a relationship the author's making, the author's point of view, or the main point? If it does, fantastic, it's worthy of your pencil. If it doesn't, it's probably a detail. It's probably extraneous information, and you don't need to waste your time, energy, and effort giving too much attention to it. Okay. Now after that, we're going to examine the question stem. I saw several who said, what's the question stem? It's the question part of the question, the part that's not the answer choices. So if you need to, as we're practicing or as you are getting accustomed to this, you want to cover those answer choices up, slap that hand over answer choices as you practice on test day. Don't look at them. Don't look at them. Go back to the text. Find the answer in the passage itself. Find proof. Find support. Predict before you peek. Match it up. Move on. That is the way to do it. This is going to help you avoid some of those tempting traps. It's also going to help you avoid second guessing. Now, each of these different passage types has a slightly different approach because, well, they're slightly different types of passages. So the elements will be somewhat different. Now, the U.S. and World Literature passage, these are coming from novels. And so novels have characters as opposed to like facts. Often when we read a novel, we want to focus on things like plot. But I want to direct you to some examples out there where like there's no plot at all, and yet we're still very interested in it. And you know, if you ever thought reality TV would be involved in your PSAT prep, well, you know, today's the day for surprises. You know, you know what the questions are going to ask you about before you see the questions. Reality TV suddenly matters to help you increase your PSAT score. Think of your favorite reality TV show, or think of, you know, maybe which your least favorite reality TV show, either one. Why do people watch it? You know, it's not because there's a really involved plot line. In fact, a lot of reality TV has no plot whatsoever. Sometimes the plot of reality TV is just like, we're going to put a bunch of people in a room and let's see what happens, right? So very, very, very little plot here. But the reason people keep coming back, the reason it's on TV is because of the drama, right? Character relationships, character motivations. It's not what these people are doing, but why they're doing it that makes for good, arguably, good ratings on television, right? It's what they feel, why they feel, what they feel about each other, not necessarily what they're doing, but why they're doing it. That is how you should read a U.S. and World Literature passage. Focus on those elements of drama. How are characters defined? How are they described? How do they describe each other? What motivates them? What's their backstory? Not what are they doing in this moment right now, because that's usually the least interesting thing that's going on. So keep these opinions straight, keep these characters straight, and focus on the descriptions. It's really kind of a character analysis. Focus on those elements of drama. What do they think about each other? Why do they undergo certain actions? What is their motivation? What is their underlying objective? And if there's a turning point in the story, always make a point of noting that. Because again, like a transition word, when you have a but or some sort of contrast, if you have a turning point, that's very likely to be a point that a question is going to ask about. All right, so we know we have a U.S. and World Literature passage here because we're not ignoring the blurb. The blurb is superb. And this blurb tells us that we got a short story. So we're like, okay, this is the U.S. and World Literature passage. And Mrs. Height is going, we've got a visit to Mrs. Height and her daughter. So we already know, in fact, our two characters. We've got a narrator, we've got Mrs. Height, and we've got her daughter, Esther. All right, now our first part here, I'm going to have you read up until, let's read right up until here. And what I want you to do after you read this, I want you to tell all of us here, go ahead, put this in the chat, what's in one word, what's the biggest descriptor of Mrs. Height? What do we know about her? All right, so we know that Mrs. Height's kind of old, and she's kind of tired, and yeah, exactly. So we have old Mrs. Height talking to the narrator and kind of talking about what's going on. Yeah, her husband's no longer there. That's it. You know, we don't care that she, you know, has some leftover lunch. You know, we don't care that it was water that the narrator brought to Mrs. Height. We're like, hey, Mrs. Height's old. Mrs. Height has lived a long life, and she's going to start talking about what's gone on. All right. Now we start to get into something a little bit more interesting. All right, I want you to read these next couple of lines here. And what I want you to put here in the chat are those words we talked about. Words that are strongly or negatively charged. words that give you insight into how either Mrs. Height views something or how the narrator views something. And we'll start to use those to develop the point of view of one of these characters. Okay, so right off, I see Parkwood has said, look at that but. Look at that contrast word. They only have one good field of land, but they have all of this other land as well. Now, how do the townspeople feel about Esther? Yeah, Anarth's people laughed at her. So Esther is being laughed at. Exactly. She's like, I'm going to go raise sheep, and everyone's like, good luck with that, all right? And then when everything comes to the point of despair, she buys all of these sheep. So we already know something about Esther, right? What do we know about Esther? Not about what she did. Like, we know Esther was laughed at. We know Esther bought sheep. But what about her personality do we know, given that, despite being laughed at, she believed this would work, and when things got rough, she did it. Yeah, so we might, I want to avoid things like optimistic, because we don't necessarily know that she thought this would work out really well. All right, optimism would be if we had proof that Esther said, don't worry, I think this is gonna work. I believe the outcome will be great. Like, we don't know that that's necessarily how Esther went about this. Esther may have been like, I think it's gonna work, and everyone said, no, it's not. And she might have been like, well, I don't have any other choice, so I guess I'm gonna have to go with my gut. We don't know either way. It could have in fact been either one of those situations. But we do know that she is persistent. We do know that she doesn't care what other people think about her, that she is in that sense going to be kind of determined or persistent, maybe stubborn. You know, we don't know if this is kind of positive or negative, but we do know that she didn't let the opinions of others influence her own actions and her own beliefs. Like, they didn't shake her own belief system. So she's a bit headstrong in that way. All right, now let's see how this all worked out. And again, I want you to think about the tone of some of the words that we see here. So go ahead and put those in the chat when you see those strongly charged words or strongly charged adjectives or phrases that are worthy of your pencil. Okay, yeah, Mary, that's right away. We see she succeeded. Exactly, this was a success. She paid off the debt. And now we have the word stubborn, and I'm glad we're kind of just, we're not really 100% agreeing that Esther is stubborn, right? I know, I think llamas are cool. 369 says, well, stubborn may be a little harsh. Yeah, stubborn, you know, we have to think of the connotations of these words. You know, stubborn usually has a negative connotation, but what sense do we have? We see it's been stubborn work, but she's been, you know, she's tended me right with the sheep. She's been good right along. What is the connotation that Mrs. Height has towards Esther? Is it negative? Is it neutral? Or is it positive? Because that would help us determine whether we want to describe Esther as someone who's stubborn or whether we want to describe Esther as someone who is maybe determined or just, you know, unyielding to popular opinion. And as Leopold points out, the word stubborn here is used to describe the work, not Esther herself. Absolutely. So, you know, what we see here is that Mrs. Height has a rather positive description. You know, the work's been stubborn and she's getting old, but she's tended me along with the sheep. She's been good right along. You know, she's saying she took care of the sheep. She saved the farm. She took care of me even when it got tough. Yeah. You know, Esther was good right along. And, this is not, Mrs. Height is not singing from the rooftops, but she definitely isn't criticizing Esther. And in fact, when she says she should have been a teacher, how do we take this? Is this a criticism of Esther, or is this perhaps Mrs. Height hoping that Esther could have had something better had it not been for the despair? So it's not like, well, darn it all, Esther, you had to go save the farm. You had to go take care of me because my husband died. Dang it all. Why didn't you just leave us all to ruin and go become a teacher? That's not the right tone. What she's saying is, Esther did a lot of hard work. Everything came to despair. She saved the farm. I wish she could have been a teacher. That would have been better for her. So it's not like a criticism of saying, but rather just Mrs. Height kind of wishing for better things that, at this point aren't gonna happen. All right, now that we've focused in on these elements, let's talk about these questions. Okay, so our first question here, and you'll notice that the answers are covered up, and that's because we're just looking at the question stem. Right now, David's got that poll open for you here. But tell me in the chat, what did we read about? What was the main purpose? Don't get fancy here. Just what generally did we read about? Now, we read about two people. I read about Mrs. Height. We read about Esther. We read about what Mrs. Height thinks about Esther and what Esther did. Yeah. Rohan, who Esther is as a person. Yeah, that's what we read about. We read about Esther's life, how Mrs. Height views Esther's life. We read about Esther as a person. Exactly. We read about Esther and what she did. That's a fantastic prediction. Now that we have this, let's go match it up with an answer choice. We read about Esther. We read about Mrs. Height's opinion of Esther. We read about Esther's life. We read about Mrs. Height reflecting on her daughter. Yeah. Match it up in the poll. So we're talking about Esther. We've got to have an answer choice that focuses in on one individual, that being Esther. And look how answer choice A does that, to suggest some of the essential attributes of a character. Who's the character? The character is Esther. What are some of her essential attributes? Well, she is determined. She was persistent. She, cared for her mother. Now let's take a look at answer choice C. Identify the major causes of Mrs. Height's unhappiness. Well, if I was kind of paralyzed and if my husband had died and if my farm had gone into disrepair, I would probably be unhappy. I imagine many of us would be too. But this is the main purpose. So when the narrator sits down to talk to Mrs. Height starts talking about Esther and how Esther saves the farm and how Esther has taken care of her and how she wishes Esther could have been a teacher. Mrs. Height doesn't sit down and say, oh, thank you so much for bringing me water. Let me tell you about all the reasons I am miserable. And that's what we would be looking for to support something like answer choice C. Like, why is Mrs. Height unhappy? Here's all the reasons why. As you are going through reading, especially in particular reading comprehension questions, you can in fact learn more from understanding why wrong answers are wrong than by getting the right answer right. So I'm really glad to see in our poll that C was really tempting because it allows us to talk about some of these trap answer choices so that you can avoid them on test day. All right, let us take a look at another question here. The description of Esther's sheep raising in these lines. Oh, we got a line reference. Fantastic. Let's go back to it. All right, got to find it. Reveals her daughter's what? Well, we've already thought about this. We already thought about this because we knew when reading a U.S. and world literature passage, character descriptions matter. That's what questions are going to ask us about. So we've already, in fact, made a prediction. Esther has been persistent or determined. She's helped her mother and helped the farm. We've already got predictions for this. She never gave up. Match it up with an answer choice in the poll. I'm loving those predictions I'm seeing coming in. Alvin says, this is so useful. I'm so excited to hear that, Alvin. Yeah, Esther worked hard. She's a hard worker. She is determined. In fact, whoa, she is determined. Did she show determination in meeting difficulties? She absolutely did. Now let's take a look at answer choice A here, because answer choice A is another tempting answer choice here in the poll, right? A desire to succeed. Yeah, I believe we all agree. Esther had a desire to succeed. Yes, this feels really good. I like it. But what does it mean? No matter the cost. What would you need to see in this passage in order to prove or support the idea that Esther was going to do this no matter the cost? No matter the cost. What would that look like? No matter the cost. So this would be saying that, you know, Esther was willing to risk everything. She was willing to abandon her mother. She was willing to do anything she needed to succeed, no matter what. Unspeakable sacrifice of everybody except for her own desire to succeed. We don't really see that extreme position here. She definitely wants to succeed. She works very hard to succeed, and she does succeed. And that matches up with answer choice D. She had some difficulties. She worked very hard to succeed. But no matter the cost implies that she did all of this at the expense of something else. And we don't see that in the passage. So that's why answer choice A is tempting, but ultimately incorrect. Every part of the answer choice has to be supported in the text. Every part of it. And as David points out, you know, what was she willing to do? Was she going to rob people? A hostile takeover? Yeah, we don't really see that. We don't really see that. All righty. So that's how you're going to approach US and world literature passages. Now, there's two other types of passages, of course, so let's go snag some of those. History, social studies, well, these are going to be different from the US and world literature because unlike character analysis, history, social studies texts have a well-defined specific purpose. You know, especially the primary source document that you'll see on test day, this has entered the historical record for a reason. You know, there's a reason that all the historical records we have are these really important speeches and documents that change history. And we don't see a lot in the historical record where someone comes up and is like, you know what, today I'm going to talk about why I like potatoes. Let me just talk about the potato. Here you go. And then, you know, 200 years later, we're reading about this text, unless we become like a culinary historian. Culinary historians do that. But those are not the type of texts that show up on the PSAT. So you want to be asking yourself, why does the author do this? What is the point? What is the point that they are making? What is the point of view that they have? What specifically are they talking about? And like I say, you're going to see those old-fashioned pieces that have antiquated language. And here's the deal, just read around it. You do not need to understand the dictionary definition of every single word on a piece. You also do not need to know how to pronounce any of these words. Pronunciation not tested on the PSAT. So if you encounter a word you don't know, use those context clues around it to get a sense of what that word probably means, and don't stress too much about it if it's a word that you haven't seen before. Particularly for those primary source documents, you know, old-timey language, a lot of them we don't use at all anymore. And of course, the writing style is also a little bit different. In many of these primary source documents, you basically have one giant chunk of text. So you can, in fact, use those transition words, those keywords, those contrast words to kind of break things up, because those are the turning points that the author makes, and those are turning points you can look to kind of identify one new idea from another one. Okay. Now, you can, of course, break these down the same way we broke down that US and world literature passage. The thing you're going to look for here is the topic and the scope. The topic is like the big what. What are we talking about? And the scope is the what about it. Okay, so we're talking about trees, oak trees. What about them? specifically. That's the scope. So figure out not just the topic, but more importantly, what about it is being discussed. Look for those topic sentences. Unlike a US and world literature passage where we didn't really see quite useful topic sentences, here you'll get more useful topic sentences that help drive what those paragraphs are going to be about. And then think about how those paragraphs work together. Is one paragraph giving a claim and the other is giving some evidence? Is the other giving a cause and then getting an effect? Do you see an example or maybe a counterclaim? How do all of these work together to build up the main point? And when you're talking about the purpose, you can, of course, use a verb. And I want to encourage you to move beyond just those verbs that you may be using in English class, like to inform or to argue or to entertain, because while those give you a general sense of the tone, they don't give you a very specific sense of the tone. So they are informing you about what? They are arguing about what? Analyzing, refuting, promoting. What specific verb would you use to describe it? That's going to rely there on the tone. All right. And, you know, as tempting as it is, resist the temptation to reread it. If you're focusing on the right elements up front, the topic sentences, those keywords, points of strongly charged language, and bias and point of view, you'll get the main idea of the passage, and that is good enough. When you get to those questions, if you need to know more nuance or more specificity, well, you can then go back once you are given a very specific task and a very specific point. So here we have a primary source document, a social studies history text. And again, we know that because of the superb blurb. This is from Booker T. Washington's autobiography. So we know who the author is here. You do not have to know about who Booker T. Washington is or have read anything else by him to do well on this passage. In fact, if you know too much about a particular topic or person, it can in fact be disadvantageous because then you start to think too much up from here rather than using the passage itself. So let's focus on what Booker T. Washington says here. Now, this is nice. Usually we don't get this, but right here the author actually says, my own belief is, whoa. If you see that on test day, like sit up straight and take notice. This author is in fact telling you his point of view right from the get-go. My own belief is what? And here we see it. Like this is the main point. There will be a time when African Americans in the South will be accorded the political rights of his ability, character, and that his possessions entitle him. So he's saying African Americans in the South will get their political rights. That is his point of view right up front. You could even write POV over here in the margin, like here it is. There's no need to rewrite this if you've already got it stated for you. And then he goes on to say, I think, though. So we've got a contrast. I want you to read the next couple of sentences. I'll have you read right up until here. How does Booker T. Washington believe that this is going to come about? And if you're noticing this contrast word here, well done. Because the first part of this sentence is how he does not think it's going to come about. And then afterwards, we hear how he does think this is going to come about. He says, well, it's not going to come about through force. So we might be thinking, all right, I want to say it's not through force. How is it going to come about then? He's saying it's going to be accorded to African Americans by white people themselves. So it's not going to come out through force. They will be given. They may protect those rights. And here we see more clarification from that in the next sentence. As soon as the South gets over the feeling it is being forced. So again, not force. It's, and I'm gonna take my semicolon and replace it with an exclamation mark because now Booker T. Washington has said this twice. And anytime an author repeats something, you know that that is important because that is clearly something that they are trying to emphasize. So it is when they are not forced that I believe this change will come about. Okay, so when it's not forced, when everyone just says, you know what, let's do it, let's just do it, that's when Booker T. Washington thinks it's going to happen. And then he says, in fact, I believe there's already some changes here. So we see two things. We've got the point of view, change will happen, and then we see, in some cases, more emphasis for what won't cause it than for what will. Now, let's grab those questions. So here we are with our first question. What is this passage described as? So this was a very short passage. But what did we read about? You know, and again, it does not have to be a complete sentence, but we read about really kind of one thing or two elements of one thing. Go ahead and tell Beth and David and Joe, Julia, Katie, Boris, tell us all in the chat. So much of us here. I'm loving what I'm seeing coming in. So he's making a prediction. Specifically, he is making a prediction about how African Americans will gain their rights and how, right? It's the how and the what. How Booker T. Washington thinks these rights will come about. So now that we've got that prediction, he's saying change will happen. Here's how. Match that up with an answer choice. All right, so I see we are leaning towards choices A and B. A description of the state of intolerable affairs. Well, here's again where we have to take exactly what the text says rather than the context that we might want to put on it. Now, we might want to read this and say, not granting African American rights is intolerable. That Booker T. Washington had no rights is intolerable. Booker T. Washington very likely felt that the situation himself was intolerable. But we don't see that in the text. Notice how your predictions are saying, well, it's a prediction of what he thinks is going to happen. He's predicting that African Americans will get their rights and not through force. That's not the same thing as describing how intolerable something is. We may believe the state of affairs is intolerable. I mean, I'm sure that we know, but that's not what this text says. Now let's look at answer choice B here. And I'm seeing now that we've talked about A, answer choice B is getting a lot more love. A statement of belief about society and how it will change. Well, what is the statement of belief about society? That African Americans currently don't have rights. And he's saying that will change when things aren't forced. That matches up exactly with what we predicted. And we can also find evidence for all of this there in the text. Answer choice C, a roadmap of how to achieve these rights. No, he's really saying it's not going to come out through force. He doesn't actually describe how to do this, nor is he calling for action. Action, he's saying, may happen, but in fact, he's in fact saying you can't create this through action. He's saying you can't force it. So in fact, he's doing the opposite of a call to action. He's in fact saying it's just going to come about naturally. You can't force it. And in fact, let's look at our next question here, which is asking, how are these rights going to come about? Well, we know a lot about how Booker T. Washington thinks they aren't, right? We know that Booker T. Washington says they are not coming about through force. So he's like, it's not going to be forced. They're not going to come from the outside. It's just going to have to be something else. Match up this answer to, now this is unusual in that we have kind of our right answer is a not. It's a negative type answer. It's not a this will happen through this, but this will happen through not that. So which of these answer choices is a not force? Or as Orion says, naturally, not through pressure. Annika, not through force. Absolutely. Match it up. And this is a good one. You know what you're looking for. You've made your prediction, and your prediction is not force. We do have to read through these answer choices and eliminate in this case to figure out what one is the not force. Increased political pressure? Well, I don't think, I mean, that sounds pretty forceful, right? Pressure is force. Laws, that's force. Peer pressure, definitely force. So look at this. You guys are going for D, big time, a natural evolution of society that is not forced, that matches up with what Booker T. Washington says. We've got proof for that in the passage. Well done on this difficult primary source history, social studies text. I like it. Now, the third type of passage you're going to see is a science passage. Now, science, I know this is always the one that is so polarizing. Every time I say science, I always get all my science lovers are like, yeah, I love science. And everyone else who doesn't is just like, I don't like the science section. Here's why love it or leave it. Regardless of your thoughts about science as a discipline, here's the nice thing about the science passage on test day. It is very orderly. In fact, it is the most orderly you can have of the different passages. Because the primary source document, it may be written in these really lengthy passages with these old-timey language and things like that. The novel, not going to have super clear paragraphs or topic sentences. But science passages are like topic, sentence, fact, fact, fact. Topic, sentence, fact, fact, fact. Topic, sentence, fact, fact, transition word, fact, fact, fact. So if you're paying attention to the topic sentences and the transition and the transition words, all the fact, 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 who cares? Don't get lost in them. They're going to contain a lot of jargon and technical terms. Well, guess what? This is not testing your science knowledge. This is not testing like how many AP science classes or advanced science classes have you taken? You know, do you watch the science channel? Do you like read? It's not testing any of that. You don't have to know any of these technical terms at all. Not a single bit of it. If you see a term you don't know, who cares? Skip over it. Don't even try to pronounce it. Just be like the M word and the J thing. Whatever. If you need to know what the M word or the J thing is, like you can just match it up. You see it. No, the proctor's not going to come around and be like, excuse me, can you know, this word right here, can you say it out loud? So don't worry about it. It's not going to matter. If you understand the concept, great. If you don't, focus on the relationships between the words you do know, and that will be good enough to get you to where you want to be on test day. And so to answer these, like I say, think about that central idea. Topic, sentence, fact, fact, fact. Don't care about the facts. Just be like, what do all these facts have in common? Are these facts explaining something? Are these facts supporting something? Is this an example of something? Is it saying it's not doing this? Don't think about the facts themselves. Think about how all the facts are related to the main idea, and then move on. All right, we've got one last passage we're going to do here together. Now we know this is a science passage because it tells us it's about lunar eclipses. Rather topical, eclipses. So this may be, in fact, more familiar to many of you now than it may have been, say, a couple of months ago, since we all learned about how eclipses work just this last month. But doesn't matter. Even if we had no idea how eclipses work, and maybe we still don't, that's fine. Now, let's look at this topic sentence. People are aware of the beauty of the solar eclipse, but are surprised to learn that lunar eclipses are just as spectacular, more common, and easier to observe. So we already knew that we were going to learn about lunar eclipses, and the topic sentence here just affirms this. Lunar eclipses, this author thinks, are spectacular. That's a very positive word, right? Spectacular. This author is not just going to say, yeah, lunar eclipses, they're things. This author thinks they are spectacular. All right, got this strongly charged language here. Now we start to get into some of this technical stuff. I want you to read through all this technical stuff, and I want you just to tell me what type of stuff is this author talking about? Because we don't care about the stuff. We just care about generally what it's all about. So we're seeing about the light, we're talking about the colors. So we're like, okay, so we're like, how do we get the colors? Talking about colors and refraction. All right, colors and refraction. And now we pay attention again, we sit up straight because we see this change. While solar eclipses last for only a few minutes, lunar eclipses can last for several hours. Okay, so we're talking about colors, we're talking about duration, and then here the author emphasizes in fact, and more positive language, the beauty of them. They're a favorite. So, okay, they're colorful, they're longer, people like them. This author definitely likes lunar eclipses. All right, and now we see lunar eclipses occur 2 times a year. All right, so with this topic sentence, here's our topic sentence. Tell me what types of facts you anticipate that you are going to get in the second paragraph. Yeah, and wish how it works. Good. What is it? Like a description of it, the scienciness of it. Yeah, those are fantastic predictions. Fantastic anticipations. Let's go read this. Were you right? Is this paragraph the how it works? What is it really in science-y terms paragraph? I like what J.J. Malloy says, the factual end of it. Yeah, good. So we learned this first paragraph's like the colors and why everyone loves them and why they're so beautiful. And then this is kind of like, okay, here's the how. Here's the facts of the how. And then, yep, we get this whole thing about like, yeah, here's where the sun is, here's where the moon is, here's where the earth is. Yes. Okay, good. That's what we got. That's all we need to know about it. We don't need to sit here and be like, okay, now how does it work? Like, where's the moon? Where's the sun? Where's the sky? Where's the thing? Because nobody cares. Questions now, because we are ready for them. Colors of the lunar eclipse are a result of, oh my gosh, we know exactly where to go because we saw all those facts about colors and we're like, it's the color part. So let's find it. And here, we don't have to know this. We don't have to be astrophysicists. We just need to see, oh, it's this that creates that. So our prediction, I'm seeing it, refractions and some dust. Refractions and dust. All right, refractions and dust. Match it up. Match it up. Oh my gosh. Fact. Soldagi, yeah. We got it. Pluck that fact right out from it. And there we go. Pluck it, pick it. We got to get a nice kind of lunar eclipse color star going on here. That's kind of it. That's kind of it. Okay, let's grab another one. In lines 26 to 27, the phrase pair of nested cones. Ooh, now this is where we kind of glossed over and we're like, I didn't really care about how these things work. I didn't really pay too much attention about it, but that's okay because this question asks, we can go back. It's an open book test. To better understand this process, it's helpful to imagine the Earth's shadow as a moon, a pair of nested cones. Now, don't sit here and try to imagine this as nested cones. What couple of words in this sentence tell us why the author is bothering to talk about these cones to begin with? Why does the author give us this whole cone description? Yes! Yes! Jackson, McEwen, Elise, it helps us to understand the process more. I05, you had that in the chat there as well. I saw it. Well, this is to help us understand it. Let's match it up. It's going to help us understand it. It's helpful to visualize. It doesn't matter whether we found it to be helpful. The author's saying, this will help you out. Visualize it as this thing of cones. Lets you create a model in your mind, Janfeng. Yeah, so it's going to help us visualize it. It's going to help us understand. It's going to help us give a model. Match it up to an answer choice. Helpful to imagine. Boom. answer choice D. It's going to help us visualize it. Well, the author told us this. You had to know all of nothing about lunar eclipses to do really well on this science passage, and that is how you should treat those science passages, in fact. All right, I love the enthusiasm I'm seeing here in the chat. Thank you so much for this first session. Now, we've got more PSAT Prep Live coming up tomorrow. Boris and I and all of our off-camera team will be back starting at 4 o'clock tomorrow. We'll be talking about rates, ratios, and more. Got some more math coming for you. We'll be also doing some writing and language for that other half of your PSAT score. Now, of course, the best way to prep for the PSAT, of course, you can take those full-length practice tests, mostly to identify your strengths and areas of opportunities. That's really the point of practice. It's not to get a snapshot of your score. It's, in fact, to help you figure out what next steps to take. Thinking positively, saw lots of that here in the chat today. On behalf of myself, on behalf of Boris, Beth, David, Joe, Julia, Katie, we got Mike here, we got Greg, we got a whole fantastic team, and all of us here at Kaplan. Thank you so much for joining us here at PSAT Prep Live. We hope to see you back soon tomorrow or next weekend as we delve into more topics then too. Take care, everyone. Have a good one.